Good morning. Welcome everybody to Corporate Scrutiny Panel. Today we've got an interesting agenda lined up for you, and I just want to let everybody know that the meeting is being webcast and recorded, so that's always good to know. And I'd just like to kick off with introductions. I'm the chair of the Corporate Scrutiny Panel, Andrew Cooper, and a councillor for the Newsham ward. Who's next?
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Will Simpson. I'm a ward councillor for Denbydale.
John?
Councillor John Lawson, ward councillor for Cleckheaton.
And Graham?
I'm Councillor Graham Turner, corporate portfolio holder.
And we are
Challoner Public Co-op Tea.
Ah, hello, Philip. Right, just didn't see a picture there. Right, good to see you. Okay, and we are expecting a couple of other members to appear during the meeting, and we have apologies for lateness from Councillor James Homewood, which I'm happy to accept. So, any other apologies besides Councillor Homewood?
None received.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. We'll just go to those. Anybody wish to raise anything under the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Lawson.
Thanks. On the previous meeting, we have 28th of February. On page 5, we've got resolved under item 8, which is the EU transition Kirklees preparations update. We have resolved that there will be a report coming to a future meeting of panel, and I just wondered how that's going to work in our current situation, whether that goes out as a document or whether it comes to a virtual panel like this. Or I just wondered what arrangements we were looking to sort of pull through for that.
It's a good question. Now we have a certain amount of certainty over the future, however we regard that certainty, then I think it would be wise for us to ask for a report. I think to come to this committee, and I presume that something is being prepared for cabinet. Are you aware of that at all, Councillor Turner?
We've had some discussions around this, and we're still working on it, because obviously the last time we had a discussion, there was still a lot of uncertainty. I still think there's a lot of uncertainty even now, but there was a lot of uncertainty. So the officers are constantly working on this. So when's the next scrutiny panel date? We'll make sure we bring something back in as much detail as we can at that point, because we will be a bit clearer, because the cut-off date for the deal's coming up shortly, isn't it?
Yeah.
10th of September is the next meeting of the panel.
So if we can ask for a report for then, please.
Yeah, make sure that happens, no problem.
Thanks, Councillor Lawson. And welcome to Councillor Akhtar and Councillor Taylor, who've arrived. And if you can put your cameras on, that'd be good. Any other matters arising from the minutes of the last meeting? Okay, good stuff. Right, interest to declare. Do any members wish to declare any interest on any matters on the agenda? Gone. I'd like to admit the public to this meeting and my attic stuff. So deputations. Do we have any deputations and petitions?
None received.
Okay. Right, any questions by members of the public? Any written questions received?
None received.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, now I want to hand over to Councillor Turner for an update on your priorities and how they're progressing in these extraordinary circumstances.
Thank you, Chair. Committee, morning, nice to see you all. This might not necessarily be the longest list of priorities you've ever had, but as you rightly pointed out as you introduced me, we live in very uncertain and different times to what we would normally have met this time of the year. So the main priority clearly this coming year is how we sort the council's finances out. Clearly, there's been a huge drain on those, and so far we haven't received the total amount of money we spent or are likely to spend before the end of the year. So obviously we're pressurising government for some more money to help us out. I have to say that we're not the worst local authority because of the prudent way we've managed our finances over the last few years. We're not in too bad a place. There are people a lot worse than we are, but even with our prudent policy and careful spending plans, we will run out of money probably before the end of the year. So there's an awful lot of work going on that. One of the problems we've got is there is still a lot of unknowns. We don't know how long this is likely to continue. We don't know when we're likely to get a vaccine. We don't know the level of unemployment we're likely to face, although we know it's going to be large, and how that will impact on the council tax discount schemes, how that'll affect CAL, how that'll affect K&H, how that affects other partner organisations. So there's a lot of work going on, but there's many scenarios. If this happens, what happens? If this happens, what happens? So, and a lot of research going into some of the stuff that's been produced by some of the think tanks and some of the large accounting organisations in the country. So there's an awful lot of work going on with that. Me and Amy spend a lot of time talking to each other, trying to work out the future. But it is a bit like bingo, unfortunately, or roulette. Next year is going to be the real problem, I think. I think we'll get through this year. So the next financial is going to be the real challenge, because some of the things that's developing now will have got worse by then. So the unemployment will have peaked by then, probably next year. Again, all those impacts will be coming through. So next year's budget is going to be a real challenge for us. And as I say, we're already working on that. One of the other things we spend a lot of time on is looking at the capital plan. What can we do? What can we deliver under the current circumstances? What's the most important things to deliver? Because one of the important things in going forward on this will be that we will be a major driver in reinvigorating or rebuilding the local economy. So we've got to make sure through procurement, where legal and where within the rules, we spend as much money in Kirklees. We're going back to the mantra we had a few years ago, Kirklees pound being spent in Kirklees. So we're looking at all that to make sure we're getting as much money within Kirklees as we can. As I said, within the rules. So we'll reviewing the capital plan, as I say, to make sure that we're investing in across the district to ensure we do play our part in revitalising the local economy. So that's going to be a fairly large piece of work. We'll be looking at the capital plan, going over, looking at a longer term plan as well, because obviously this is going to have an impact for a number of years. So we need to be thinking a bit longer term as well. So we're going to do that. At the moment, one of the other things we're doing is working how we get some of our public buildings back open safely, such as libraries, not without its challenges, but we're working on that. We would have perhaps been a bit further on if we hadn't had the local lockdown this last week. And depending on when that finishes, that has had an impact on some of our plans, but we are getting there slowly with the libraries. As I say, it is not without its challenges, because they are public buildings, and we have to make sure that the public are safe, and of course the staff are safe. So that work is ongoing. Obviously, as you probably saw last week, still working very closely with CAL to see how we can help them get through this, and we're also redefining our relationship with them. So whilst the majority of that recommissioning work is going on through public health, obviously I'm involved at a slightly less level from the capital point of view. So that's work that's ongoing as well. We're going to deliver the library's capital plan this year, or a significant part of it. We've got planning permission for a new library in Birkby. That's now out to tender. There was a slight delay when we had to do some work around a stopping up order on the actual site we're going to use, but that's progressing now. So hopefully we'll get the tender sorted out and we can start building that. We're optimistic we can get that built in a relatively short space of time. So that'll be great delivery this year. On that capital plan, we're still talking around what we can do for Murfield. Heckman White's progressing now a little bit. We've got some options on the table, and we're looking to get some plans drawn up for Heckman White. So that's a good step forward. We're still trying to sort out the best plan for Home Firth. We had a distanced walk round Home Firth a couple of weeks ago with senior officers, myself, etc. So we've got some options on the table for Home Firth, so we'll push that one forward. So the capital plan in libraries is important and is going along quite nicely, despite some setbacks of the early days of COVID when people were not available as much. But we're back on track, I think, with that now. So we're going to have a new asset transfer policy, which we should be bringing to Cabinet probably the next Cabinet meeting. That's nearly been finished, just about to sign it off now. It went through Cabinet Cabinet had a discussion on Monday, so that's going to come through, which we think will help communities with buildings especially in post-COVID world. We're going to talk about comms. We've already started talking about redefining our comms policy, and I see Marcus is here, so Marcus will talk about that next. So the comms policy is important, and again, one of the conversations we had around this is how important comms has been during this COVID outbreak, making sure that residents have as much information as possible through as many channels as possible, and that we don't leave anybody behind. So, but I'm sure Marcus is going to talk about that. So we've got some interesting ideas how we can move the comms policy forward. So I'll leave that at what's on Marcus's Sunday. One of the other things I want to do, and Andrew knows about this because we've been involved in this. So there's a small group, well, small to large group sometimes, working on a white goods recycling and reuse scheme. That's getting some traction now, and hopefully we can have something up in place and running for that before the end of this financial year as well. And that's going to be really important as people's pockets get hit by reduced incomes, or those who lose their jobs, people on benefits, etc. So that's really important. That's taken a little while, but we've made some real progress. I think we're heading in the right direction on that. So there we go. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss them.
Okay, members, any questions? Councillor Lawson, did you indicate?
That's a hanging hand. I beg your pardon,
right.
Chad,
okay. Councillor Taylor,
Councillor
Taylor, your hands up. Yeah.
Just a couple, really, Graham. The asset transfer policy, would that not come through scrutiny? I think it has done in the past.
I think it. I don't know. Did he go through?
Should we just say that way as a question?
I don't know.
I think we have had asset transfer through.
Yeah, we have had it in the past, so I would have thought it would have come here before the decision was made. Sort of pre-decision scrutiny.
Well,
perhaps
fine.
take it away, Graham, and
I'll check on that. As I said, we haven't. I've literally got to sign the last version because I looked at it again this week and there was a couple of typos. So, but apart from that, it's virtually ready to go. Sorry, I saved your job, John.
Yeah, and then the other one on public buildings. I thought we were going to be having ward-based discussions around the public buildings in our wards. This was something that was discussed with the leader and Jackie a few meetings ago in terms of the meetings group leaders were having. And
for members of the public, Jackie is the chief executive, Jackie Gedman.
Sorry, Andrew. Yeah, and that doesn't seem to have happened yet. So I'm just wondering when there is going to be that engagement at a local ward level, place-based discussions around public buildings. So, for example, we were talking about, on libraries was the one that was used, where you may have some libraries where it's going to be difficult to reopen those libraries because of the physical layout of the building, but there may be an alternative community building in the area that possibly a library service could be, operated from in the short term.
Yeah, my understanding is that those meetings are already started to be scheduled, because I'm fairly sure I've got one scheduled coming up in a couple of weeks. I've already got a date for mine, and if I could look on the other screen, I could tell you. But I'm sure those have been.
Well, we've not had any.
Start working on them.
Do any of you know who's organising them?
Well, in our ward, I believe Julie's organising. Julie McDowell.
All right, so I'll chase Julie.
And
there's a meeting set up for Newsham, so we're being sorted.
Yeah. And I probably should have touched on that, but I wasn't sure how far down the line we were with these meetings. That's one thing that we'll check out this year, and we'll probably run into next year, really, if I'm honest, is how we move to more place-based working. We will get in there slowly. I think this is up the ante, if you like. We'll move more swiftly to a place-based working, but it is quite a large piece of work, obviously, because some of that will depend on how quick people want to go back to either in an office or work from a shared space somewhere else. So we're sort of looking at that things, but it's fairly early days on that because it is going to be a large piece of work. So have we got enough buildings? Are the buildings in the right place? Do we need all those buildings? So we will move to a more place-based, but I was waiting till a bit further down the line, if you like, because as I said, we need these ward-based meetings first. So there will be a lot of that going on, but I think that is likely to run into next year because just the sheer volume of work in that, readdressing the whole Kirklees buildings estate. So yeah.
And next to speak, Philip Challoner, who's a co-opted member.
Yes, hello. Going back to the asset transfer thing, I think it certainly is part of the corporate scrutiny's review. We've looked at it several times, and I believe on our programme at the moment it's a lead member to receive briefings. Is that correct?
So that again, Philip.
Sorry, if my microphone's probably not so good. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. I think we have looked at the asset transfers as it's been going on in previous corporate years, and I think this year it's down on the programme for you as lead member to be briefed on the progress with the new strategy.
Yeah. Well, I'm more than happy for that to be shared with the with the panel, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions for Councillor Turner? Okay. I've got one or two. I heard you say, and I'd just like some clarification, really, that we'll run out of money before the year end. I heard you say that, and then you also said get through this year. What could you just clarify those remarks, Graham? Which one is it?
I think I said we'll probably run out of money before the end of this year.
Okay.
On current trajectories, we probably haven't, unless we receive some more money, we will probably use all our reserves by the end of the year. But there again, just to qualify, there is a lot of unknowns out there. The longer this goes on, the more impact it has on the budget. The more unemployment rises, and we can't predict that just yet. That's an impact on the council tax take. We don't know how many people will default on council tax. So some of it is a bit of a finger in the air, but we will be very marginal. If under current plans, we will probably run out of money by the end of the year. That would use all reserves, and that's not a position we want to be in. I mean, we've argued about reserves for as long as I've been in this job, and probably the people before me, what the acceptable level of reserves has been, and Eamon and myself have always erred on the side of a little bit caution and having what we call a reasonable amount of reserves. So I've been pretty average across the SIPFA profile that they produce, and I think that's proved in this case to be the right policy. Obviously, nobody spotted this coming, but yeah. So there's lots of difficult decisions around the finance. We'll probably very tight right running out of money. Yeah. But some of that, as I say, there's so many unknowns. We don't know, as I say, what's going to happen. And it's, as I said, that's Eamon and I have many conversations every week about it. But yeah, others will run out of money long before we do.
Yeah, yeah. There was a sort of messaging thing here as well, Graham. We're not the worst council. Is it's you're damning yourself with faint praise with that, and I do worry that sometimes we should talk ourselves up, in terms of the good positive things, but that's just a stylistic point. You talked about the public buildings and about bringing them back into use and things. Well, the other side of this is are there public buildings which, or at least council offices, that should remain closed? I mean, we are now continuing to operate with a lot of staff working from home, and we have two big buildings which are largely empty, Civic Centre 1 and Civic Centre 3. Has any thought been given to the long-term future for office accommodation in a world which might have changed fundamentally and permanently?
I think I mentioned that, didn't I? I said we'll be reviewing what buildings we need across the whole estate, and whether they're in the right place, whether we need to have smaller satellite offices, and that works around the place-based work, doesn't it? So say it's going to be a large piece of work, and as I say, that will I don't think we'll see much movement on that until possibly the next financial year, because it will take a lot of sussing out. And not only that, is we might need those buildings, because we might need people who want to come back into work to have safe spaces. That's one of the problems I understand we've had in Civic 1, is we do need people in Civic 1, but it's spacing them out.
Okay.
So that they've got enough contact with each other to be able to work as a team, but having sufficient space. So that's one of the other issues. I have to say, a lot of what's going to happen, in my opinion, is predicated on whether we get when and if we get a vaccine. If we don't get a vaccine, we're going to be in this situation for a number of years until that comes through, and that's going to be the problem. Is it? There's an awful lot of unknowns, as I said earlier. If we get a vaccine relatively early, and people take that up, we can go back to working a little bit, more based in large offices. But at the moment, I just don't see that. And in actual fact, if people want to continue to work from home, this conversation with the head of HR is, we should be looking at making sure those that want to continue to work from home do so, and have the equipment, etc., to do so safely and enjoy that facility, because some people actually really like working from home. So we may find that, even post-vaccine, half the staff don't want to come back. So then we'd have to rationalise the estate. But it's a big piece of work.
Sure, understand that. When might we see something?
As I say, I don't think you're going to see anything this financial year. You'll be looking into next year.
So nothing before next April, right? Okay.
I will. We'll be moving more place-based, but as I say, there'll be still a lot of unknowns, isn't there? And we need to get some of these more things clarified as to do it. But
just trying to get a picture.
Yeah, we're on with it.
Okay. Thank you. Right. The next item is the communication strategy, where we have a verbal update from Marcus Bowell, who leads for Kirklees on comms. Marcus, over to you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, panel. I've got some slides that I think Olivia is going to put up for you. It looks like it's loading. Excellent. So I'll just introduce. Members will be aware that the peer review identified strategic communications as a priority, and we're in the early stages of putting that new strategy together. And so this is a good opportunity for me to engage with elected members as we develop it. It's not just about elected members. I want to get the whole communications team and partners engaged in what we'd like to see from our work in the future, and draw on their experiences from inside the council. One of the other things I'm also keen to do is look beyond local government and look at theory and practice elsewhere outside of our sector, because that's the kind of level that we want to aim for. So I'm going to present the outline of our thinking so far, what might go into a communications strategy for Kirklees. So if we can just move on to the next slide. Now, starting with objectives, I think our objectives need to reflect what really works, what we're really aiming for, to be clear for everybody in the team and beyond. And in my experience in local government communications, there aren't that many secrets. And the rules of local government communications have remained broadly the same in my 20 odd years of experience in it. Now, the first truism that persists and endures is that the more people feel informed about what their council is doing, the higher their opinion is of the organisation. It doesn't actually matter if people necessarily agree or even care about what the council's doing. The fact that they know is enough to drive perceptions. So we need to make sure all our planning and our activity reaches the largest possible audience. And I'll come to how we might do that in a moment. The second truism of communications broadly is that the best communications is conversational. Producing content that connects with people, that engages with them, and that connects with people's empathy, with their thoughts and their reactions, is the most effective. And knowing your audience is a key part of that. So we need to think about being creative about the channels we use and the content that we produce. And the third pillar of our objectives is going to be evaluation. I'm a disciple of insight-driven communications. In my profession, we like to think of ourselves as all creatives, but numbers is also a key part of what we do. It is a numbers game, communications, in many respects. So we need to be ruthless about what's going right, what's not working. It's the only way we can really drive continuous improvement. So that's the third pillar of our objectives. And the final pillar is, and it's probably the most important, human beings communicate through telling stories. It's kind of hardwired into us from the early days of evolution. And it's really easy for local authorities in particular that do thousands of things every day, to stand there shouting random bits of information at people out there without telling a story around values, outcomes, human experience. So it's pretty ineffectual if you are from the shouting school of communications. But there's another phenomenon of local government communication that I think is important here, and that's individual service successes don't strongly influence residents' views on the council. The council's reputation is forged on its ability to tell stories, or its story, on a grand scale. So they're the four areas that a new communication strategy will revolve around. Every piece of communication that we do should pass through those four lenses, and we should be able to evaluate from that activity whether we're actually meeting our objectives. Because I think around those four objectives, where you can really build a first-class communication service. So if you move on to the next slide. Now, I've said already that I don't think there are too many secrets to good communications, and I don't think there are too many secrets to good strategy either. You've got the clear objectives being set, and I think the most important element beyond that is to be honest about the barriers that you face and whether you have a plan to overcome them, to address the question of why aren't we doing this already. So for each of those objectives, I've just sort of summarized what I think our barriers are at the moment. So on our reach, the number of people who kind of see our stuff, we need to have a look at the channels that we're using to get our messages out. My impression so far, and I'm relatively new into the job, although over the last few months has felt like I've been here quite a lot longer. My impression is that we have a lot of ways to reach people in Kirklees, but some of them are quite shallow. So we need to ask ourselves, have we gone down quite a narrow digital route? Are there other options out there where we might be able to reach more people? We need to think creatively. We need to think radically about how we improve those bottom line numbers on how many people and who receives our messages. On engagement, I want us to take a harder look at the audiences out there in Kirklees. We need to work better with services and with partners who are out there in the community to understand better what really interests and engages people. That's how you can develop a kind of conversational style that I think would be more effective in cutting through. And on evaluation, we need to build an infrastructure in the service that kind of routinely tells us how we're doing. In a previous life, I worked on the evaluation metrics that the government use for their communications. And there's some quite straightforward lift and shift work we can do and that we're already doing to measure our activity against those national standards. And I want us to be open about it. I want us to be able to publish how we're doing regularly, internally and externally. And I think communications is one of the areas of the council that will really benefit from a kind of data-rich, insight-driven approach to everything we do. On storytelling, I think there's three things that we can do. The first is to establish plot. We need to have our service really embedded in our overall corporate planning. How we communicate recovery, for example, will be critical. Communications is often seen as a kind of add-on service, but I think it should be something that really binds our work as an organisation. The second thing we need to develop is our characters. I think there's definitely an enhanced role for members in telling our story and residents. not simply the council doing things. So we need to be a bit creative about who we put as the star of the show. And thirdly, I think we need to strengthen our brand, to be disciplined about how we present our work, and that it's recognizable and that it's telling that one grand overarching story. So the next slide. Now, most of the things that I've talked about so far have been kind of weighted towards the technocratic side, stuff that's quite easy to convert into action. But equally, I want the service to have an ethos and a personality, because our values are important in driving our communication. So I've included a kind of quick rundown of some of the values that I think should drive our team in the future. And towards the top, we've got some factors that I think should flow through our content and our messages. They're kind of our external values. The stories need to be about people, how our work affects people's lives. There's an old communications cliche that I think's still really relevant. It's about show, don't tell, and I think having people at the centre is important to that. And we need to spread our net more widely. I think we can collaborate with others who are also telling the Kirklees story and celebrate their successes just as we do our own. And I think we should take risks. I think we should. It's the only way that we can get creativity embedded in what we do. Yeah. And as we move onto the second row, there's some values that kind of cross over both our people and our external work. I want us to be able to work at pace. I think the last few months has taught us what a communications outfit that works at pace might look like, and it's really rewarding, and it's productive, and it can be creative as well. And at the bottom, I've just picked out 3 of the kind of behaviours that I think we should celebrate as our team, within our team. I think we need to challenge ourselves. We need to be striving to do things better, not assume that the status quo is optimal. I think we need to create forums internally where we can exchange ideas freely, whatever your role in the team, and listen to new people, outside people, to hear their ideas. And communications is a fast-moving profession, especially since the digital era. It's always changing. We need to make sure that as people, we're also developing, because that's the best way to develop the service. And I want us to be open about what works, what doesn't. If we're going to take risks, we need to be open about where they've come off and where they haven't. It's all about driving change, which is really at the heart of any strategy that we put forward. So what happens next slide, please. We've got a lot of work to do. We want to build a collaborative, restorative kind of a strategy. So I'm going to engage the whole team and hear their ideas so that we can all sign up to it. We'll engage with partners. I want to get their views on what they want or need from a communication service, and where we can learn from them. And once we've got those basics in place, I think we need to put together an action plan for exactly how we're going to overcome those barriers that I've alluded to earlier. Now, some of that work's already in progress. We've done some work on evaluation. We've got some oven-ready branding ideas. And we've I do apologise.
Not half baked then.
I hope not. We've built some more collaboration. I've set up a communications forum with partners that we talk weekly, and we've been collaborating on COVID quite a lot over the last few weeks, and I want to do a lot more of that. And then I think we'll be in a position to finalise the strategy, but I hope this sets the tone and gives you a flavour of where we are. And I'm happy to take any questions members might have.
Okay, so members, questions? Just looking to see who's indicating. I've got 1 or 2 if nobody else has. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks for that. That was really helpful, and just a couple of comments really. Firstly, around the engage part at the end, Marcus, where you're talking about engaging with partners. Where do councillors sit in that?
Well, the first step, members in this forum are the first people I've spoken to about that. So that's one part of it. I'm open-minded about other forums that might be available, might be useful. But we genuinely want this process to be restorative.
So I quite often articulate what originally was the chief executive's phrase about councillors being at the heart of all we do, and that's all councillors, all 69 of us. So clearly, if we're pulling together a communication strategy and we're looking at what works and how that works and how that might work differently across the diverse Kirklees, sort of area, clearly councillors have a role to play in that. We have a lot of rich intelligence about our own areas. We understand what chimes well, what doesn't. So for example, that Kirklees as itself, the term doesn't work that particularly well because people don't identify with Kirklees. We talked, and Graham talked earlier on in this call about, the approach to place-based working. Well, that needs to be the same in communications as well. So we need to recognise that, our communities, there isn't necessarily the same need, the same way to communicate. One message will probably, to communicate across the whole of Kirklees, will probably end up being so bland that nobody will really appreciate it. So it does need to be nuanced, and councillors need to be at the heart of that. So I don't necessarily expect an answer, Marcus. It's really a comment to go, just put that in the back of the head and do some thinking and think about what is the best way and when is the right time to start that engagement with the broader community, because that's really important. And the one thing you don't want to do is put together a communication strategy that you then find councillors aren't signed up to because they haven't felt involved, engaged, and allowed to, sort of contribute to it. My other one, it's a bit of a whinge really, is I'm nervous about some of the communications we do see from Kirklees, and particularly on Twitter, that sometimes, as an opposition councillor, sometimes does feel overtly political, and I think you need to be careful when communicating as Kirklees Council. And I'll give you two examples of that. Now, other members may not agree with me. I'm just giving you my perception. So on the Kirklees Twitter, it has a number of times promoted or pushed Black Lives Matter. Now, Black Lives Matter as an organisation or movement is controversial, but the issues behind it around ensuring that everybody has social justice and everybody has equal opportunities is not. So the way in which you communicate is very, very important. If you want to engage the entire community, you need to do it as you've spoken, in a way that tells the story and talks about people, but doesn't do it where it's too overtly associated with an organisation that has some controversial aims. And the second one, very recently, was around the decision by the government to put the council into additional measures around COVID, where there was a Twitter post that kind of suggested that the council didn't know anything about it. Whereas clearly we know that there had been lobbying going on for 24, 48 hours before and trying to keep us out of it. So clearly the council had been involved, had been engaged, did know, but the way that the tweet came out kind of suggested that the council was blindsided by it. So they're just two examples, but I think it's really, really critically important that we be careful about that. And as I know that other colleagues won't necessarily agree with my perception of some of those.
No.
But they are my perceptions, and if we are going to get something that engages all communities, it needs to be done in a way that isn't deemed by some people, from whatever political viewpoint you come from, is felt to be inappropriate. And that is a difficult ask, to be fair. I recognise that.
Can I come in on some of that?
Yeah, please, Marcus.
Just to go back to the start, the engaging members in the development of the strategy, I totally take on board. We will build that in. I've sort of alluded to how we'll try and make councillors a more important character in the story that we're trying to tell, and that and I think I didn't say it probably clearly enough, but that means every councillor in Kirklees. Just on I thought it was interesting to your point about Kirklees and people's recognition of Kirklees as a place. I've worked for 2 other local authorities, one of which was Stockport, which had exactly the same position, even though perhaps from the outside people think Stockport's a more coherent place. Actually, we found from the new COVID regulations that at least half the people in Stockport think they live in Cheshire, and then some others think they live in Manchester. I also work for Westminster Council, and the difference between people's sense of belonging to Westminster in Knightsbridge as opposed to Queen's Park was also very different, even though Westminster on the face of it seems like quite a coherent area. So I'm not, Kirklees is probably a bit different, but they are the same challenges, and we're completely aware of that. But I will build in councillor engagement more thoroughly into our process going forwards. On Twitter, all I can say is the motivation is not party political in any way whatsoever, though I totally accept your view on perceptions, and we are careful every day about how we present issues. I think it probably goes back to risk a little bit. We've tried to develop a bit more of a conversational style on Twitter. We've tried to not be so obviously a large organization. We've tried to engage people more, and perhaps sometimes that conversational style can lead into risky areas without those motivations intended. But I will without addressing directly some of the specifics you raised.
They were examples.
Yeah, I will take that away, and the caution that you suggest is well understood.
Yeah, and Councillor Taylor's expressed those views in other places where the politics of this can be in some ways more effectively hit. Really, I think. Councillor Turner, then Councillor Lawson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the conversations when I was talking to Marcus about developing this strategy, one of the things we talked about was, and this ties in with what John said really, is do we understand what method we need to communicate with our residents? And that's talking to people, understanding. Certain amount of people will need will want direct mail shots, if you like. Some will want to use Twitter, some will want to use Facebook, some will want to use the internet for other sources. So one of the things that Mark is trying to do is understand what our residents want and how they want us to communicate with them. Because I don't think, I'm not being unfair to previous people in this role, but I don't think we ever really understood or asked that question. We assumed that Twitter, Facebook, all the things was working, and it does, because I look at the figures every week, and we get we get a lot of hits, but we do need to understand more readily how the best way to communicate with our residents, and like any, if you like, engagement, consultation, call it what you will, not everybody will get what they want, because some of it will be totally impractical. But part of that process I would envisage is in asking local ward members what they think. As I say, you might not necessarily get what you want, but let's have an understanding of what the public want out there, and then we can serve that need as best we can within budgets, within technology, etc. So that is fair point, John, but we've already sort of spotted it, if you like, and Maxwell will be doing something around that. Just want to add that.
Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. Just goes to show you can't please all the people all the time. I was delighted with the coverage of Black Lives Matter, as I am with the Pride comms that we put out. I think it's solid work. Just a couple of comments on what Marcus had to say to us there. I think I've noticed not a couple of instances notwithstanding during COVID where we felt that some of the communications was broken down, and I think looking back, That's not all directly to do with the council. That's to do with things upstream from council, between central and local government, where some of those kind of fluidity of communications has been interrupted. I'm thinking particularly of the outbreak in Cleckheaton. You know, I have first-hand experience of that. I think that's improved. I think that we're learning in a way that perhaps we haven't done before. So I think that kind of responsiveness to how things are done and picking up where things have fallen down is actually improving. I've seen that just over the past couple of months, which is encouraging. The other thing I'd like to say is that I was glad to see show not tell in there, because that kind of strikes with sort of the creative writing sort of experience that I've had in that. And the other part of that is take away the scaffolding. You touched on it with the amount of chaff that goes in the air with our comms, and it's how highways treat the street scene. You know, there's a certain amount of signage there that after a while just becomes pollution and hides the actual those safety messages that we have to put out. So those really kind of inherently important messages that we have to put out are sometimes disguised by all that scaffolding. So try and strip out some of that scaffolding or put it somewhere where it belongs, really. The other thing that I think the last thing is a direct question, actually, and it's how do we go about improving our consultation results? Because, and I'm thinking in particular here of the Devo, the West Yorkshire Devolution consultation results, and you know, by any measurement, they left a lot to be desired. And I think whatever we do, if we, you know, Marcus, I think we were talking about looking to other sectors. Maybe that's where we should be going to improve those consultations, because at the heart of it, the responses from those consultations have to be meaningful for us to make decisions, and for us to have a feeling as members of the public that those decisions are robust ones, that they're strong decisions. And I think that's a question I'd kind of ask you kind of now to be thinking about how do we draw more from the public and engage more from the public in terms of those consultations.
Marcus, anything on that?
Yes. If I can just go through some of the other points Councillor Lawson raised. We hold our hands up on the Cleckheaton outbreak and how we learned from that process. It's interesting now that I get approached probably weekly from other authorities to ask how we now deal with communications around that. Our protocol has been shared around West Yorkshire and beyond. So learning is important, and holding your hands up when a different approach might have been better. On consultation, I think actually in the end, the consultation was it picked up towards the end in terms of broad numbers. We finished pretty much, apart from Leeds that who had a lot of responses, we were about the same as everybody else, maybe a little bit behind Wakefield. So it wasn't on numbers. It's not the most important thing. It wasn't a disaster. That's not to say it couldn't be better. It was a really interesting consultation because they had something like 4,500 responses overall across West Yorkshire. Other mayoral consultations exactly the same. I think the Sheffield consultation got about 1,000, and that was their target for engagement in their consultation. So at that kind of level, they did well. For me, the most important thing would be to be able to run your own consultation. Of course, it was Wicker whose consultation it was. I didn't think they had really thought through who they were targeting. They had quite a blanket approach. They didn't think about the groups who might not engage, and they were kind of running to catch up during the consultation because it surprised them that people in certain socioeconomic groups weren't responding. So I'd like to plan it better. I've run quite a few public consultations in my time in a previous role in a civil service role, and there's lots of good practice that we could bring to a future consultation at a Kirklees level. But I couldn't really say much more than that at this stage. But consultation, definitely. I think it's as much about engagement as consultation. I think we should probably try and forget the consultation word as much, because that's quite a technocratic, dry thing. I think there was some cynicism out there about whether people engage with that public consultation, whether it would change anything. So if you're consulting, ask a genuine question is the first.
So an example that sprang to mind when I was looking through that was, I was a member of the Mid Yorkshire Health Trust Scrutiny, and when the changes were coming there around about 5 years ago, they ran a consultation that it was external to them. They employed an external consultant, whatever. But one of the things that they used that they got a lot of response from was road shows. Now, I know all of these things they cost money, all of these things, but it's just having that creativity, and from your own experience, you'll have a lot of that to draw on, and it's just you're quite right, that equation between engagement and consultation, it's you don't get one without the other, really. So it's just having that eye on how we really get the best that we can out of any of those experiences.
I think that's absolutely right. I think we've reached a point in communications where there may be a pivot at where you use digital channels and where you might want to look back to what you might have done in the past but don't do now, and the face-to-face engagement is really valuable. All the metrics show face-to-face is something that people value. It's tempting to go down the digital route, and we should develop that and make it as easy as possible. But certainly broadly on the comms strategy, we're looking beyond digital, and that may seem old-fashioned and it may cost sometimes, but we can't rule it out on those grounds.
Okay, I've got James, Will, Philip, John down. So James first.
Thank you, Chair. So generally, yeah, I just wanted to comment that.
Put your camera on, James.
Oh, can you not see me?
Nope.
I can see you.
I can see him. Just say it.
It's my problem. Carry on, James.
I'll carry on. Yeah, I'll just say generally, I have had. I do think there has been an improvement in the communications over the last 6 months or so, and that has been noticeable to me. And I'm guessing that's part of a wider strategy, but obviously it's been helpful in terms of the COVID stuff. And I think particularly the stuff around the restrictions and social distancing and guidance has been quite useful. And I think the way it's been broken down into sort of almost like frequently asked questions is something that I think's been good, because I think on a number of occasions, I think people have been specifically looking for, does this mean there's going to be a lockdown in Kirklees or something like that? And they're just looking for a very specific information. And I think from a digital comms perspective, that is something that as ward councillors, obviously it's easier for us to share on our own platforms or via email and things like that. So that's useful. And as I say, I think there has been an improvement, but the only thing I did want to comment on is just some of the digital comms we've done in the past, and particularly the kind of like around some of the video snippets and things that we've done. It has been noticeable to me in the past that sometimes the quality of those doesn't seem to be great. Particularly whether it be the leader of the council or the chief exec. Sometimes the backdrop doesn't look particularly great. The sound quality is not good. I seem to remember one where I think it was the leader of the council was kind of had a video recorded with sort of dying plants in the background and things like that. And I was a little bit surprised watching it that nobody in the comms team when that doesn't look great. Maybe we should redo it in a different room or with a different backdrop. And as I say, I think that has been an improvement, but I would just welcome your comments on whether that's something. I think you kind of understand that and you're making improvements, but I just, for me, it sometimes takes away from the message, because you end up not listening to what's being said and just kind of wondering what's going on in the background, for example. So yeah, I'd welcome any thoughts you had on that.
We have been focusing on video actually we've done quite a lot of training. We've invested in some technology. One of the issues we've had is lockdown, and there's been a lot of people filming themselves, and we have provided scripts and advice and things like that, but it does, people aren't necessarily used to doing that, and I totally accept what you said. There's a part of me, and it's not just in Kirklees, but more broadly, that there's some authenticity sometimes about people filming themselves in their natural environment that I found quite powerful sometimes. But as we move forwards back towards some sort of normality, the professionalism of our video content certainly is something that we're looking at. We have invested, and I'm hoping we should see some quality improvements. Like you say, it's small things about backdrop. We've got exact guidance about filming in portrait or landscape and doing all that, but I take on board what you say about just
to say, I wasn't really, it wasn't so much a criticism of recent ones, because I think actually the ones done from home are quite good. It's more the ones that have been done previously from council buildings where things just look a bit drab.
Sure.
And I would have thought as a communications team there would be, you would have that set up so that you can do quality communications that look and sound good. And I think you're right. The ones that are actually done from home, particularly, I think there was one the chief executive did when she was talking about working from home and how, following the social distancing and stuff. That sort of stuff. I think obviously that works really well and looks, makes sense to do it in that manner. But yeah, it was more some of the more historic stuff, I think. And when we're doing things in the actual council buildings, I would expect that quality could be improved in terms of the technology we're using. Backdrops,
totally accept that. It's straightforward to do, hopefully.
Good, thanks.
Okay, next, Will.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, thank you very much, Marcus. It's really nice to meet you. I think this is the first time I've spoken to you, so hi and thank you very much. I think your presentation was really, really positive. I was really pleased to see it, because since I've joined the council, though I think there had been very slow and slight improvements, I was really frustrated by the council's, what I thought was an ability to communicate effectively. There has been, as James said, a really noticeable improvement in the last 6 months or so, so that's really positive. And from what you've told us, I think and hope it'll continue. Just what sort of jumping onto a point that John made about the consultation results. Is it possible for when we have our sort of key strategic comms about things that are the fundamental objectives of the council, we could be using sort of paid reach as well as organic reach to make sure that people know about what's happening? So for something like when we had the blueprint fly-throughs, I thought they were really, really good, fantastic visual storytelling of our objectives as a council, a visual storytelling of the capital plan. That's probably the best we've ever told story about our capital investments. For things, and then we were asking for people to give us their ideas. We did an engagement about blueprint, didn't we? Can we use sort of, as well as I imagine they had a high organic reach, some sort of paid reach like the government did when they were promoting the towns funds, to make sure that people know what's going on and promote them in having their say on those sort of. Obviously we can't do it for everything because we can't spend loads of council money on just advertisement, but when it's key strategic priorities and engagement like that, is that possible? And just to sort of agree with something that John said, and which you have sort of already addressed, so you might not need to comment on it, but obviously one of the key challenges is, as John said, people don't necessarily identify with Kirklees. It's more of an administrative area than, in my ward, I've got 10 villages, all of which are incredibly distinct. If you say to someone from Sisset they're from Clayton West, they will not be happy with it. So when you've got an area as vast as Kirklees, they don't necessarily identify with that. But as you say, I imagine you'll be wanting to build that, because I feel an identity with Kirklees, but that might just be because I'm a Kirklees councillor and I work within these boundaries. So I've built those relationships and feel like I have that connection to Kirklees, which most of our residents might not. So I imagine part of what you're wanting to do is building that story and making people feel more of an identity with Kirklees, but also, and this is something I've mentioned to senior officers before, which has been touched upon, we need to, I think, build. We need to communicate better on the level in which people already identify as well. I think I personally, it's just a personal comment, I think I do that quite well in using my own outlets as a ward councillor, but I do that politically. I don't think the council communicates with people on that level as effectively as it could.
Okay, on the paid for advertising, yes we can, and yes we do on certain things. The blueprints, I think, were before my time actually at the council, but I think they were a really good piece of work, and I think certainly something like that would fit the bill for a key strategic priority that tells a story of what the council's trying to do. So it's a big yes on that. We probably need to look to diversify how we might do that. It's really easy on Facebook, for example, to advertise and to target geographically and on other metrics as well. If Facebook's got a reasonably specific audience at the moment, and maybe that overlaps quite a lot with people that we find it quite easy to communicate with. It's about what else is out there, and we need to do some work on that. But in principle, yes, it's something I'm hugely in favour of. It doesn't cost a lot to get big numbers, so yeah, I'm all in favour. In terms of the audiences, I think if I had an answer to that, I think we'd be or a straightforward answer about how we tell all those different stories and bind them into the one big Kirklees story is difficult. But I think on the last 2 points that you made, how do you communicate with people at their level? I think one of the things that we need to do is look at all the various audiences that are out there in Kirklees. It's a hugely diverse place, geographically as well as in a number of other areas, and we need to understand those audiences. And I think a lot of those will be place-based, they will be village-based, and that's why I think your plot about how you weave in that local story with the grander story, the characters that you use, local people from that place as the star of that, but always having in mind the bigger picture is really the challenge. But if we can see that is a challenge, we're more likely to build content and use channels that are that might do that. I'm sorry that's quite a waffly answer, but I understand the problem, but I think the way we address it is in practice and the way we think about how we produce stuff.
I thought it was a thoughtful answer, so not waffly. And so, Philip, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not quite sure whether my mic works properly.
Yes, fine. Yes,
Marcus says it's very interesting, actually, that to some extent your answer just now is helping. It seems to me that when I talk to people, the council is, we pay our taxes, what do we get from it? And, or it's either moans, and the people that engage are the people that want to engage. And I don't know how big that sort of breadth of audiences are that are, it's council tax and now else, what do they get from it? And that's a very important group to try and engage in terms of perhaps the consultation that went. I must admit I didn't do much about that consultation, but in consultation traditionally, they said, well, we've got views, but they're going to do what they're going to do anyway, is often the feedback you get from people.
That's absolutely right. But there is one, as I said in the presentation, there is one metric, I call it a truism, that if people know about what the council is doing, it does challenge that perception of I pay. They may not agree with it. They may think the council's wasting money, but it's about, that's why I think reach is really important. A lot of communications people will talk about how you engage with people, whether people were, whether it was a two-way conversation, but I think it is a lot about reach. Do people know what the council is doing? And then even subconsciously, they think that is what my taxes are paying for, whether I agree with it or not. It's the silence and not knowing what the council does that is the most harmful to reputation. There's quite, on customer service, there's quite a lot of really good analysis of where even people have had a no from the service that they were asking for, they feel more positive than those who've had a good result, because they understood the process, or they could put a human face to the activity. So that's why the first thing I always look at is reached. Are people out there, when they think of Kirklees Council, do they think of activity? Do they think of something being done? And I think that's a real challenge. And I think there is a gulf at the moment for probably every local authority in the country. And it's about how do we evaluate the numbers so that we know we're reaching more and more people, and then we might start to see reputation increase.
Thank you for that. I think the other point I'd like to sort of quickly make is also that ordinary employees of the council have a very valuable contribution to make if they know how to communicate with the public. I mean, I had an issue about green bins, and so you're discussing at a senior level, reviewing the contract on recycling, and it was very good engagement. We had very good conversation. You've got a feedback.
I think that's been a real learning point for me here. I've never worked for an authority where, with the biggest employer in town, that we occupy that place in society, and I think that puts an onus on us to make our internal communications. Lots of our staff live in Kirklees. My last experience was in a London borough where nobody lived. None of the staff lived there. That presented different challenges, but recognizing that and the importance of our internal communications, and encouraging staff to be ambassadors for our organisation is hugely important. And I think there's a kind of watershed moment for us now, with a lot of the workforce working from home. There's been a massive upheaval in the council. I hate to use the word opportunity in association with COVID-19, but it is a chance for us to kind of reset how we engage our people in new ways. It's more important so people don't feel left out or isolated from the organisation. So we do, internal comms is going to be a really critical thing, and I didn't mention it in the presentation. I ought to have done.
Okay, thanks for that, Marcus. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, a couple of things. Just firstly, echoing the points that John made around the consultations. I'm a big advocate of the place standard approach. And what I've learned from Place Standard is, it is that richness of the conversation, but actually, more importantly, you've got people who don't engage. So actually, you do any sort of consultation, and Philip's absolutely right, that the people who are engaged will respond, but the vast majority of the public don't. What Place Standard does is you go, and we were stopping and talking to people as they went into the co-op on a Friday night. They would never have spent 5 minutes filling in an online questionnaire, but they were happy to talk to us. So I think there is something about consultations about, you will get the people who are engaged, but if you want to engage other people, you do have to go out there and find them. So you're absolutely right in talking about, it's not just about digital, it's about the old face-to-face stuff as well, because it really, really does work. Just on coming back to local communications and echoing the point that Will made about, we both represent similar types of wards, that they're more rural. I think I've got 10 villages, so you've got one more than me, Will. But they are all distinct in their own right. But there are advantages to that as well, Marcus, and this is why I said about engaging councillors. Most of those villages have some form of communication within that village. We have some that have monthly magazines, quarterly magazines, websites, newsletters, all this kind of stuff that we can use. And just to give you a couple of examples and flavours of that, in the village that I live in my ward, when the blueprint was done, I got one of your team to produce a 2-page article for me on the blueprint, which then we published in our village magazine to try and get people out here in the more rural parts of Huddersfield to engage with the blueprint consultation. Now, you can't do that frequently because people then start to see their village magazine as just being a council publication. But when there is something really important, there are opportunities which local councils, I'm sure every ward will have their own ways in which they communicate, and those groups that they can reach easily, which will help you with your reach if you come out and talk to us. And then actually to offer an example of a solution where you can do something that then resonates Kirklees wide, and it's from the cultural team. So and Kath Davis, who I've spoken about before, I think is an excellent officer. So Kath did some fantastic work on woven as an initiative, which picked up on the textile heritage, which is something we do share across the whole of Kirklees. So actually what you had was something that brought all of Kirklees together, but was localized so that you talked about the textile industry in your area. And we even had some village-based stuff that was going on. But that kind of, it did that at Kirklees level. There was, the Woven Festival, but then it was very, very individual to communities. So that's a really good example of how that communication can work across the whole of Kirklees, but still feel place-based. And I'm sure, so we explore other opportunities like that, but that was a brilliant example of when it worked really, really well. So a bit of a solution there as well.
Yeah, I did. Just to wrap up those two examples, I think they're both about how communications engages with other parts of the council, that making communications integral to the work that's going on with the place standard, for example. I don't know the extent of communications involvement with that with that work so far, but I'd like to make them complementary, because engagement and communications should overlap. They should be seamless. Likewise, I agree with Woven. I think it's it sets a bit of a benchmark for what the way we should be working. If we're plugged into other services, we know about those sorts of great stories, and we need to do that better, and we will do.
Thank you, John. You've lowered your hand. That's good. Yeah, one or two thoughts I've got from this, and thanks for the presentation. Been really interesting. I'd welcome your thoughts on the wisdom from a communications perspective of chasing corporate awards, Council of the Year, this sort of thing, because I know there's a certain enthusiasm for that sort of thing. And I remember when the council won Council of the Year in like 2008, it was a mixed blessing. Oh look, we're Council of the Year, but my bin's not been emptied, the roads are crap, all those sort of things. So from a comms perspective, I'd welcome your view on that. Maybe some thoughts on how the relationship with the local and regional media is going. It went through a bit of a rocky patch, and I just wonder if you've got any reflections on that. I've heard what people have said, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Lawson, I think, about ward members outside the administration and their role in it with comms. One thing that occurred to me is it would be really interesting is to have somebody from the comms team who was a comms lead for a ward, and I think there might be, it'd be great to know somebody who had, maybe two or three wards that they looked after, and therefore was somebody who we could talk to about things that were going on, because it does sometimes feel like comms is about the administration, and I know there have been ambitions to change that. Really, the thing you said about people and pushing people really chimed very much with me in terms of the video and the video content. I did, despite my own political views, I did think, are we really seeing Councillor Pandor clapping again outside his house for like the 7th or 8th week? And I did think, what about, here are some people in Berkenshaw, here are some people in Dalton who are out clapping, but there he was each week, and it did become a little bit tiresome, got to say. So yeah, I get that. just want to say something about Councillor Taylor's views about Black Lives Matter and the things there, and I do appreciate difference, and I think it's important that we acknowledge difference and that political opinions and political views, and that we respect those, because there is there is a trend at the moment among certain folks not to accept difference and to close down difference and to illegitimately close down opinions, and we really don't want to get going down that path at all. Having said that, I don't agree with you. And so there we go. So yeah, a few thoughts there, Marcus, if there's anything that chimes.
Sure. I thought your point about corporate awards was very interesting. The last council I worked for was Westminster, and chasing awards was a very, very, very important part of what we did. And I was part of winning a couple. I think you can take it too far. It was almost part of our performance appraisal how many awards we'd won, which can be distracting. But I do think winning an award is brilliant internally for the team. It really motivates people. There's not a huge amount of glory in local government all the time if you work in it, and I think it's right to recognise the brilliant work that goes on. Yep. Not from a communications point of view, but the brilliant work that goes on every day out there in hundreds of different services. So I'm in principle in favour. People will always criticise, but I don't think that outweighs the benefits personally. The only question for me is how much resource you devote to it at the expense of anything else. But that's quite easily avoided. On the relations with the media, it is something in the last few months I've really worked on. I've called all of them to try and say to introduce myself and say we're here, we're open, and I think the kind of constructive approach has paid off a bit. It doesn't make you immune from criticism. That would be wrong anyway. But I think we're much more open. Actually, a couple of them have been in touch to say how brilliant they found working with our press office recently, because it's not just about the issues, it's about how we deal with things. Whether we get back to journalists who are asking a question, whether we ask questions back and engage with them rather than just sending them a statement in response to a question. Those kind of small things that journalists hate, we've tried to kind of iron out of our system, and we've got a much more friendly kind of tone as well. I think that's good on both sides. But I come from a family of journalists and stuff, so I can tell them with and be genuine that I kind of support what they do, especially in terms of local democracy. The press is good for that, and it's a shame that it's not as important as it used to be. So there's that. Comms leads for wards. It's not something I had thought of, but certainly ward members being part of that grand story for Kirklees is hugely important. I don't know whether comms leads is necessarily the answer, but engaging members in this process is something that I will take away from this conversation and work on.
So the sort of thing I'm thinking about, I don't want to label this because we have other items on the agenda, but the sort of things like sometimes we have really great news stories, like we as a council we caught somebody who's fly tipping and we've prosecuted them, we find them. As ward members, we don't generally find out about that, and we've got to push. Sometimes we've reported them, and so it would be great to be able to push those news stories. We don't push those stories, that we actually catch some of these individuals, and so I think we ought to do things about that. We've got a play area which at some point will be opened when that becomes possible. So there's numbers of stories and things which go on, and we get involved in loads of activities. We're telling our own stories all the time about the things that we're engaged and active with. Now, we can do that from a party point of view, but some of it is legitimately about our role as ward members and things that the council might want to promote as being what ward councillors do, and legitimately. So that was the thought.
I'll take that away.
And having a comms lead would be, might be helpful. It might not be, might be worth looking at, I think. Okay, so we've really gone through comms in a big way, which has been really interesting, and thank you for that, Marcus. Much appreciated. Right, we'll now move to the next item on the agenda, which is the council financial management update. And have we Eamon Croston hovering?
Good morning. Am I on? Can you hear me?
You're on. Welcome.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, just to introduce myself, my name's Eamon Croston, Service Director Finance for Kirklees Council and Council Section 151 Officer. The financial management update I'm presenting this morning is a bit of a patchwork quilt because it covers three broad areas. It's slightly looking backwards, slightly looking at the present, and also looking further ahead. I remember last time I came to Corporate Scrutiny Panel, 28th of February, giving a financial management update. I think it's fair to say that things have moved on slightly since then, and brought its own challenges. Hence probably the scope of this report. So I appreciate it's probably slightly larger than a normal report, but it does reference other reports that are in the public domain as well, just to bring us up to speed. So I'll rattle through my presentation relatively quickly and open it up to the floor, because I don't want to hog all the time that's left for the rest of this session, but I'm sure there'll be further opportunities through subsequent corporate scrutiny panels to update on what I'm about to describe in this update anyway through the remainder of the municipal cycle. So the first part of the report is pretty much a brief reflection on the 20 financial outturn position, which was presented to Cabinet on 28th of July and is going to full council on 2nd of September. And I think last time we reported to Corporate Scrutiny Panel, we were predicting that the year-end position on general fund against a budget of 287 million was looking at a marginal overspend, about £500,000, and as officers we're reasonably confident we bring that into line by year end, and that's pretty much what has happened. We did acknowledge that with the outbreak of COVID, there were some cost pressures coming through in March as well that were captured as part of 2019-20 outturn, and we matched that with some of the corresponding government grant funding that was applied against that. HRA overall in a break-even position. We know the issues at Kirklees and nationally around funding pressures on high needs, and that's reflected in the dedicated schools grant deficit, which rolled forward into 2021, which I'll come back to in a little bit. Capital spend, we spent 81 million compared to 68 million the previous year, and there are some capital rollover proposals in the outturn report, which will be considered at full council, mainly to do with deferred contractual commitments and funding. So the second part of the report looks at the emerging in-year position, and I've focused particularly on two areas. One is around high needs. There was an operational guide released by government on 20th of July, and I've included some relevant extracts from that at Appendix 1. I think the importance of that guide, it sets out a framework for how we're going to engage government around our own accumulating high needs funding deficit position. And I'll just sort of briefly, by way of this presentation, within that Appendix 1, there's two particular areas which I thought were quite interesting. Paragraph 280 of the guidance, which is included in Appendix 1, where the DFE recognises that some authorities, which despite their best efforts will still not be able to pay off their historic deficit roll forward from the DSG over the next few years, the government department expects to work with those local authorities to come up with an appropriate solution over the medium term. And the following paragraph does state that as part of an appropriate agreed package of measures, the department, if necessary, may make funds available from within the overall dedicated schools grant funding allocation so that the local authority can pay off its deficit over time. So that's just to note that we will be engaging as a council, the relevant government departments, broadly based around that framework, and we'll be starting that over the next few months. The guidance does state that we send an annual return anyway into government, which has been delayed slightly because of COVID capacity issues, which will alert them to the scale of our deficit, and they'll come and approach a number of authorities in the current year to have a conversation. We're hoping that we'll be one of those groups of authorities. If not, we'll be making our own representations anyway to government to highlight it in terms of the scale of the impact. And we know as well, in terms of the high needs pressure, that we've got a structural deficit in year, not to the extent of the rolled over pressure from last year, but we know that that structural pressure will continue. And while it's coming down year on year as government awards more funding and is rolling that out over time, we do know that we've still got some challenges there. COVID-19 impact on council finances, that's writ large over the current financial position. We did take an early report to Cabinet on 21st of May, setting out some of the key issues at that time. And in broad terms, there's three broad areas of impact on the council's financial position. One is around additional spend that councils have incurred to support the national effort. One is around COVID impact around social distancing, closing down elements of the local economy, and irrecoverable service income loss. And the other is around sort of broader tax income loss around business rates and council tax as well, and expectation that that deficit will roll forward into next year. So when we brought the our emerging intelligence to Cabinet on the 21st of May, we were looking at a potential cost pressure across those three areas of anywhere between 34 and 65 million, depending on how quickly social distancing measures eased down and the economy reopened. And a whole raft of assumptions, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, remain quite fluid. So that take these projections for what they are, quite fluid projections. And we've also from April been submitting monthly returns to government. All councils are doing this, and that's giving around what the total cost pressures are on council bottom lines as a result of COVID impacts. And government, to be fair, is using that intelligence on an ongoing basis to review, recalibrate and update its funding allocations to councils. As well, at Appendix 4, there's a broader sectoral analysis that Local Government Association have undertaken on the strength of the set of returns that went in from councils in June. And I think the importance of that is it puts into national context what the scale of the pressure is, and actually breaks it down by category of council. For example, the Mets, the county councils, district councils, because at a local level, they all provide slightly different range and types of services and have slightly different sets of pressures. But overall, like, the usefulness for us is to put our own projections in the context of benchmarking across the sector. We're not out of kilter in terms of what we're coming forward with, and we'll continue to share that intelligence for the remainder of the year. And we do know that since the start of COVID, the government have effectively announced 3 different tranches of funding to cover off additional spend pressures, and which nationally amounts to about 3.7 billion. And our share of that to date is 28 million. And on the back of updated monthly returns, they've also now honed in on irrecoverable service income loss, and are going to come forward with a range of support measures to support councils that won't be able to recover that income. And I cited a couple of examples in the report around things like car parking and schools catering income, some of the variable income elements of that. But there are other examples as well. And government is actively looking as well at council tax and business rates income shortfalls impacted on by particularly around the economic impact of COVID, short term and possibly longer term as well. And they're going to bring forward some further detail as part of the forthcoming comprehensive spending review in the autumn about potential mitigations or support to councils around some of the council tax and business rates income loss. That might include both the current year that's going to roll forward into next year, any collection fund deficits, and also in terms of future forecast deficits as well, because one thing that we do know is that some of the impact of COVID on council finances is going to undoubtedly wash through into our medium-term financial strategy refresh going forward. The third part of the report was looking further ahead in terms of merging medium-term financial strategy and what are the sorts of things we need to be thinking of in terms of positioning the budget strategy update report, which is going to come to Cabinet and Council October 20th and 21st. So in the report, listed at paragraph 2.5.2 of the main report, I've listed some of the things or some of the main things that would be in scope as part of that medium-term financial strategy review. Some of them are things that we would always consider as part of the annual review. For example, corporate risk assessment review, reserves requirements, demographic, demand management reviews, inflation, etc. But even a lot of those things and some new things are obviously going to be impacted on by COVID in terms of what's going to wash through into the following year, not just the current, having to manage the current year. When we set the annual revenue budget in February, we did make reference to the fact that we were looking to review the planning framework for revenue and capital going forward. That we'd be looking to review our medium-term financial strategy in the context of a 5-year revenue plan. Accepted this is incredibly even more difficult than a business as usual year, but we will be bringing forward a fair degree of sensitivity analysis, and probably the corridors of uncertainty around that sensitivity analysis are going to be significantly wider than normal. And we're also looking at stretching the capital plan as well over a longer planning framework, which I think we've discussed at previous corporate scrutiny panels previously as well. So there's a lot of officer input at the moment in terms of reviewing our current budget plans, revenue and capital, and that will feature in terms of forthcoming proposals as a staging post for the October report, and subsequently will formulate into the annual budget report proposals next February. Just to note as well that government has announced that there will be the autumn CSR, whenever that is, could be late October, November. They'll look at it in the context of a 3-year revenue plan for government departments, and I think a 4-year plan in terms of capital proposals as well. But I think the Chancellor has reiterated some of the challenges that if within the parameters that government are going to set in the autumn, they'll be looking at potentially spending cuts in some areas and additional investment in other areas. And Robert Jenrick, local government minister, has reiterated he'll be back in the corner for local government as part of the forthcoming CSR review, and the consultation or call for evidence is out now and runs till 24th September, I think. And government has also announced a more fundamental review of business rates, although I think that's largely looking at the medium and longer term, whether or not business rates in its current guise has run its course, and looking at potential alternatives, like particularly around things like online sales tax. But I think that's more for the medium and longer term, and it's certainly not going to be implemented anytime soon. We've got a Q1 financial monitoring report, which is the first formal report, which we'll be reporting to Cabinet on 1st of September, no doubt. You get the opportunity to feedback on that as well, in terms of what the current year position's looking at. I just want to pick up on some of the conversation at the start as well, about the concept of running out of money and reserves. So I just think it's kind of a question of interpretation. If you recall, and it was set out in the Cabinet report on 21st of May, some of the immediate concerns, certainly from senior council officers, finance officers, was actually to do with cash flow management, that access to short-term liquidity, which is part and parcel of our daily cash flow management. that liquidity was running dry because councils were getting more nervous about inter-authority lending and borrowing, because at that point that's when all the significant cost pressures were coming through, and at that point government hadn't quite announced yet what levels of funding support were going forward, but government recognised that quite quickly, and at the time they actually front-loaded a lot of grant funding allocations to councils, and that liquidity issue is quite quickly dissipated, and we've separately reported on that as part of the annual report of Treasury Management Activity to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee recently. So that was an issue about, you know, literally running out of money in the sense of access to short-term liquidity, but that was an issue across all councils, so that's gone. I think in terms of what government has funded thus far to support the whole range of cost pressures, it's certainly welcomed by the sector, across the sector, but as you'll appreciate, there's ongoing dialogue, not just at an individual council level, but particularly at sectoral level through local government associations, special interest group of municipal authorities and others, to keep that dialogue going and to ensure that if there are any further emerging shortfalls, that government will commit what it said it would honour from the outset, is to ensure that councils weren't falling short as a result of their support towards the national effort around mitigating the impact of COVID at a local level. So I think we're continuing to hold central government to that commitment. So if we will continue to review that through the year, but undoubtedly if we did end up in an overspend position at year end, and that would obviously roll forward and offset against reserves that we have accumulated going forward. So we need to keep an eye on that and do everything that we can, both locally and in conjunction with central government, to ensure that as far as we can, we deliver what we can within budget, but accept that that's still quite challenging and difficult. And if we're talking about potential second waves and things like that, and this is all speculation, then quite quickly the cost pressures could escalate to deal with that. So it's making sure that as we go through the remainder of the year, that's been recognised nationally for specific additional measures we might have to implement locally. And I think the other point that Councillor Turner raised at the start was quite right in terms of the CSR 2020 announcement, because that's going to come quite late. We need to, and it's potentially a 3-year settlement. We need to ensure that government is adequately supporting councils going forward, because one of the early sectoral issues anyway was that, okay, through CSR 2019, there was significant investment gone back into local government, but that was to keep our heads above water and deal with the demand pressures going forward. So we felt that that would give us probably enough impetus to manage within our means and have an adequate level of reserves to support that around the known unknowns. But clearly, in light of the COVID impact and how that's going to wash through potentially in terms of some of our underlying assumptions around resource availability, we need to ensure that the sector has a good funding settlement. Particularly if the sector is going to continue to support the national effort around things like economic recovery and supporting our most vulnerable, because if it doesn't, then we're into the realms of making some really difficult choices. And government's committed to not reverting back to austerity Mark II anyway, but we need to see the devil in the detail of what that announcement's going to bring going forward. So I'll shut up at that point and open it up to the floor for comments or questions.
Okay, members? Any questions? Councillor Taylor.
Oh, unmute.
Unmute.
Oh joy. Oh joy. Apologies. Thank you, Eamon. Always appreciate the work that you and the team put in. And as you and I were talking about in a meeting yesterday, this is a bit like nailing jelly to a wall, isn't it? I thought I'd get that one in first. That, you know, how do we actually know what the outcome's going to be at any point in time, because there are so many moving parts and there's so many unknowns that you know, all you can really do is be realistic about the forecasts you provide and, you know, the rationale behind them. My specific question really was more about our engagement as a scrutiny panel in the budget planning process, because you make reference in the report about taking the budget strategy update to council and cabinet, but I'm not sure when that's coming through scrutiny.
Right.
So it doesn't make reference to that, and I can't see it in any of our plans either. So it's just a question on that. I mean, otherwise, there's probably not a lot really you can comment on, really, because you say, I mean, there's so much that is unclear. All you can continue to do is provide us with that narrative, and all we can continue to do is to all of us in various ways is lobby the government to make sure that we're getting the support that we do need throughout the the period of this pandemic and beyond. So thank you.
Chair, can I just respond to the point about coming back to scrutiny panel?
Certainly.
I mean, if it's not in the programme currently, I'm quite happy and keen to bring something back in terms of emerging developments around that before it lands on 20th and 21st of October to Cabinet and Council. So I think that's just enough if there's scope to programme it in.
If we can, let's add that to the future programme if it fits with our timetable. So yeah, no, that offer's accepted. So Philip.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think I termed a phrase when I was working in a different sector 20 years ago at the turn of the millennium, working in an ambience of ambiguity, and I think you've certainly done a lot of work with that. But I was curious because you've got an indication of a potential further cost pressure in the next year with the pay awards. So you'd allowed for 2%.
That's right.
And you reckon it's going to 2.75%. What does that mean in actual sort of money terms?
It's about an extra 1.4 million.
Okay, so it's probably achievable, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is what it is. We make estimates for budget purposes, and 1.4 million in the context of a 300 million budget. We'll manage that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Over to Councillor Will Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Eamon. Thank you very much for that. It's on the I'd be interested to know on the tax income loss forecast. You've got it as a total of 11.1 million. Yeah. I'd just be interested to know, how does that break down between, because I didn't quite understand it from the 4 paragraphs that are there, between the council tax reductions that have already been made, the council tax reductions that are projected that we're going to have to make, and business rates. I was just wondering how it breaks down between those. I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I set out in the main report what the kind of levers were to get to that position, I think we have to accept that even within those levers are quite fluid. So looking at council tax, when we set the budget every February, we sign off against an assumed council tax base for the forthcoming year. So that reflects not just the the level of percentage uplift on your council tax bill. It also takes into account assumed growth on housing supply. It takes into account what the likely demand is on your council tax reduction scheme for those who can claim that, who are in receipt of means tested benefits. And probably also it does take into account performance on income collection through the year against income due. So if you were to average those 3 out, for example, we're now assuming that when we set the budget, we had assumed growth in housing supply, kind of a bandy equivalent of about 1,100 in the year. We're now predicting that that's probably not going to materialise, and it might be just a catch-up issue, but we know that the economy has been put on pause a little bit. So while the construction sector is starting to pick up a little bit, there has been some deferral around that. So some of it is probably timing issues when those are going to pick up again. So an element of that reflects that. We're looking at a potential slight blip in terms of council tax income collection rates, although they seem to be holding up well at the moment. So again, that is a reflection of the fact that some of these early predictions were based on little intelligence coming through, you know, in terms of month by month. So as we go through the rest of the year in terms of building up the month by month picture, we'll get more of that emerging intelligence through to be able to make a better prediction about that. So our council tax income assumptions are probably holding up slightly better than we might have thought. Probably the most significant short-term impact is, as you'd appreciate, there's been a spike in universal credit claims, and that's had a consequential impact in terms of council tax reduction scheme take-up, which increased by 2,000 in the space of, I think, 4 weeks at the start of April. Which is probably unprecedented in terms of trends, certainly over the last few years. And I think the projections to the year end put a little bit of prudent contingency in that we're probably expecting a little bit of a second wave as furloughing starts to withdraw as well. And, you know, and with the best intentions to try and kickstart the economy, we know that there's some suppressed unemployment as a result of furloughing measures, and that's just an inevitability, the scale of which we're not sure about yet. So there's a bit of forward projection as well as understanding what's coming through today. I think with the business rates, again, it's quite difficult to predict because we set a baseline at budget time based on what the business rates base was at the time in terms of number of businesses and what we were recovering from business rates income. We didn't put any assumptions about business rates growth in the year, but clearly the economic impact is going to have an impact in terms of number of businesses, and that might have a consequential impact in terms of business rates income collection as well, because there might be fewer businesses. There's going to be some churn in businesses as well, because some businesses will both fall by the wayside and new ones will come on stream. And again, the issue about collection rates as well, where a number of businesses we know are hanging on by the skin of the teeth from a cash flow perspective, and that's notwithstanding, you know, the various government measures that are out there to support businesses through the medium term. And what we don't know as well is to what extent government's going to review some of those measures as well in the fullness of time over the coming months. So I think it's just a reflection of the fluidity. So I haven't given you a definitive answer. I've probably just explained there are a number of contributing factors, but the overall extent of our prediction is in line with the sectoral analysis in what our neighbours are predicting, probably other than Leeds, which is an outlier in that respect on a number of fronts, and certainly in terms of across the Metropolitan Authority family as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again, Eamon. I can only guess at how frustrating some of this is for you and your team, where you do a body of work and then have to redress it almost hour by hour sometimes when there are announcements made and you have to sort of go, right, okay, we'll start again on something, you know. So thanks for bringing the report. I think as usual, my eye sort of rests towards the future, especially Appendix 6, where we have the risk management item.
Yeah.
And we talk about, you know, the difficulty in scenario painting at the moment, and because it's so complex and there's so much interplay with so many different things between economy, decisions that central government are going to make that will affect us directly. My eye rests on item 12 in the risk management, which is the financial regime set by government causes a further loss of resources or increased and underfunded obligations. So with that in mind, I think as an example, we look at the announcements from Mr. Jenrick over the last couple of days to do with planning and how that might influence. And I don't expect you to have had a full sort of gestation time on the effects of that. But I can only assume that the kind of the cutting off of 106, as he's implied anyway, I've not had time to sort of fully sit down with the full statements, would have quite an enormous impact on how we go about kickstarting our own economy in Kirklees. So those kind of interplays on top of things like a washing away of the economy, a second wave, the end of furlough, and the oncoming Brexit in January. Very difficult to kind of anticipate and kind of just plan for. So I'd kind of appreciate a couple of words on that. But the other thing that it particularly caught my eye was the housing and homelessness situation and some of the funding that's behind there. I'd just like a bit of an update if you have it to hand. It would be, and if not, then I'm quite happy to take it afterwards. But it'd be just interesting to know just what's happening with that situation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. On the former, yeah, you're quite right. There are sort of a plethora of announcements which are coming through, and obviously as we're developing our emerging strategies and modelling for those, as far as we can, we would take those into account, but acknowledging that it's kind of early days as well in terms of some of that. So clearly, as you know, as finance colleagues, we wouldn't be doing that independently. We'd be liaising closely with other departments and broader intelligence, as well as what the impact of that might be. As you know anyway, our capital plan, there are a disparate number of funding sources that sit behind that, and there is an element of fluidity and assumptions around some of those funding sources as well. So as we're reviewing our capital plan and also our broader regenerations plans as well as part of that, that's something we will have to continue to review and understand if some funding sources potentially are likely to go, or in their current guise, what alternative funding sources might take their place if we think that the things that those funding sources hitherto were supporting are still key priorities. Because I think particularly around development and infrastructure development, which is where Section 106 was meant to fund anyway, I think they've been imperative to understand the implications if some of those funding sources morph into something else or fall, because those local infrastructure requirements are still there in terms of, you know, impact of developments on other services that need to be provided to those local communities. So it's how then do we do that, and how do we then prioritise that against other competing demands in the plan? So I'm giving you a definitive answer to that, other than to say yes, we would obviously log and acknowledge some of these emerging sort of national policy developments and try and understand what the impact of that might be over time, because some of it might necessarily have a consequential impact straight away. Some of it could take 2, 3, 5, you know, even longer to actually infiltrate into the system, notwithstanding that I think it's meant to be a bit of a kickstart measure to accelerate housing supply. The other side of that equation is deliverability and capacity to actually deliver the scale in terms of scalability of what the government's trying to roll out as well, which again is a challenge in itself. On the latter issue, I'm afraid I'm going to have to come back, or if we can bring something back or answer it separately, and because I haven't got the absolute detail on that, but I do know as part of the COVID financial reporting, we've been picking up some of that additional fund, particularly around the early days around rough sleeping measures, but also around preventive strategies, because the level of demand on homeless prevention is increasing exponentially. And that means that we've got to work even harder in terms of those preventive measures. But undoubtedly, there are going to be some consequences as a result of broader economic impacts on specific categories of individual as well. And we're going to have to plan and manage that and work through, as part of our housing supply and specialist accommodation strategies, how we're going to support that going forward, both short term and longer term, which was always the intention anyway. But undoubtedly what COVID has done is accelerated some of those issues and brought them to the fore earlier, perhaps.
Okay, thanks, Eamon.
Thanks. I appreciate, Eamon, that your job is trying to identify a lot of unknowns at the moment and trying to put figures in places where you simply don't know what the real figure will be. Yeah, your efforts really are appreciated. One thought just on a specific issue, I guess, is going around Huddersfield Town Centre. I've noticed it's even more difficult to park than usual, and I know some of that will be due to the Market Hall car park closing, but I think it also may well be because people maybe who work in town park in town now, and so basically the fact that we don't have parking charges in the town centre as opposed to the car parks around it may well mean that it's more difficult for people who are trying to shop or come into the town centre for a few hours simply aren't there. So I'm wondering whether there's any thoughts about trying to get some more churn within town centres by reintroducing parking charges within town centres to as opposed to around them. Get some income in. Oh, Councillor Turner has indicated maybe he wants to come in on this.
Yeah, I'm probably more likely to know about this than him, to be fair. There is
about income, but yeah, okay.
It is about the strategy around that as well. So there has officers have been drawing up some papers with some suggested strategies and some suggestions about how we move forward with the parking. So it is being looked at the moment, and it will come through in due course as to what the recommendations of cabinet and officers are. But as I say, there are several papers being finalised just at this moment in time. So we are looking at it, Andrew.
Okay, is the phenomenon of it being impossible to park in Huddersfield Town Centre recognised?
I haven't read the latest version of the report, but because there's two that came out in fairly quick succession, I need to read the other one. But yeah, there is a lot of work going around parking. Yeah,
I think it's the churn, the lack of churn, really, that's the issue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's one of those. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, I do get that it'll be tough as an administration if you it's tough at the top, as it were.
It is, Andrew.
Okay, but yeah, just thought I'd help you with that. Okay, so next item is the council's our work programme going forward. Is there anything anybody wishes to raise under this item? No. Okay. Right. That in mind, I now will close the meeting, and I understand that we've just got a quick briefing that we need to go through at the end of it. So if members can hang on, but that closes.